Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's free weekly e-newsletter, Unleashing Your Remarkable Potential, which is full of articles and resources to help you become a more confident and successful leader. Sign up by going to remarkablepodcast.com/newsletter. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, another live episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. You can get all future live episodes and therefore interact with us and see them sooner by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. And whether you're watching live or you're watching later, but watching and not just listening, you can see I'm in a different location than I usually am. I would give a hat tip to my good friend, George Allison, but he's not on any social media. This is his separate building. He calls his radio room because behind what you can't see is all of his ham radio operation stuff. So he's not on social media. He's on like over the air media. How about that? But I am down the road from the farm I grew up on here in Michigan, here in July, and excited to be with you. Let me just have us dive in, should we? So learning for leaders who have been on the journey, and many of us have been on the journey and we have lessons, not just the t-shirt, right? And having people who have been on the journey and know what they're talking about is really a joy. And we have one of those people for our conversation today. I'll introduce you to her in a second. But while you're here, if you're here with us live, I want you to imagine that you're joining us for a cup of coffee or tea or whatever beverage you choose. Please share your questions, your comments, your ideas. They'll make for a better conversation, eventually for a better podcast episode too. If you're here with us live, in the comments, just tell us where you're from. We'd love to know that as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Remarkable Masterclasses. Each month, we release a new skill in an advanced masterclass format designed to help you become the remarkable leader and human you were born to be. Details on how to get on board for a specific skill or to get discounts each month can be found at remarkablemasterclass.com. It's probably time for me to introduce my guest. I've sort of given you the tease. I should probably introduce her. Here she is. Her name is Michelle Reines. Let me get her bio up here now that I've moved my slide. Let me move back over so I can see it and read it to y'all. Michelle is a speaker, author, coach, entrepreneur, and an ever-evolving badass leader. She is the founder of MDR Coaching and Consulting and the creator of the Unconventional Badass Leader brand. The people part can be the most challenging part for many leaders. It certainly was for her. Her wake-up call in the form of a cataclysmic leadership failure. She very quickly learned to appreciate the profound impact an unconscious leader has on people, teams, and organizational health and performance. The significance and value of a team became abundantly clear, as did the critical importance and necessity for her to begin evolving as a leader. This painfully humbling experience set the course correction for what would become a lifelong hunger for leadership growth and contribution, a self-prescribed reparation in many ways. She is the author of the book From Bad to Badass Leader, 12 Leadership Lessons. Her name is Michelle Reines, and she is our guest. Michelle, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Well, hello, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be here and share an unconventional brand on a bright Monday morning.
Well, absolutely. I'm so glad that you're here. And this is the first guest that my grandmother would have turned me off during the introduction. She wouldn't probably love that title, but that's okay. We're not going to worry about that because grandma's not watching. So we're not going to worry about that. Michelle, before we go any further, one of the questions I like to ask people, and I think I want to get to the cataclysmic leadership failure in a minute, but I'd really just like to know a little bit more about your journey. Sort of like what got you to this point. You didn't come out of school thinking I'm going to become a leadership consultant and coach. That wasn't where your head was, I don't think. So just tell us a little bit about what leads you to this place. And then I'm going to ask you about that failure in a couple minutes after that.
You bet. Well, the as far as how I ended up in business, I very early on, growing up in a household where my father was a businessman and did a lot of startups, I was always at the dinner table and listening to his stories of work and all of that. So I always kind of had an ear to business, an ear for business, and an interest in it. And so when I started out in sales, like many people did, and then very quickly put some numbers on the board, which earned me some great opportunities to be promoted from within. And I was promoted at a very young age. And then that's what ultimately led to my wake up call, we'll say.
Well, hey, in the bio, you said cataclysmic leadership.
Bad,
So you can call it a wake up call if you want.
It was a massive failure.
That's the first time I've ever used that word on this podcast, I think, right? So tell us about that big failure. You write about it in the book.
Yes.
I actually read it twice because when I first got the book, I read that part. And then today, to refresh myself for this, I read it again. So tell people a little bit about what happened.
Yeah. So what happened is I started out in sales, and, like many salespeople, I was very driven, very results oriented, and was putting some incredible numbers on the board. And as a result of that, I ended up getting the attention of the executives, the power that be, because my numbers were really a huge gap compared to their top performers in the company. And so, of course, I'm very enthusiastic, very ambitious. They invited me up for an interview, flew me to Chicago, had a fantastic lunch and kind of a wine and dine on a Friday afternoon, and then went home, packed my bags, and ended up starting there Monday morning at 9 a.m. in Chicago. So I moved from Atlanta to downtown Chicago, where I very quickly became a general manager over a team of somewhere between 14 and 18 people.
So let's just stop. I want you to continue the story, but I want to
Yes.
make a point to everybody here, right? So you're 26 years old. You've been promoted quickly, very quickly,
Yes.
and people have heard this story before, right?
Yes.
We promote the best salesperson to be the sales manager. We
Yes.
promote the best accountant to be the accounting manager. We can go right on down the line. And what Michelle is going to describe and being, sort of transparent and vulnerable is what often actually happens. Because, not for all of the same reasons or any of that stuff, but the fact is, just because we're good at doing the work doesn't mean we can lead that exact same work. So I just wanted to take that little pause there, sort of as a lesson for everybody, who might not be in your spot, but are in the position of the person that flew you to Chicago for that interview, right?
Right.
So go ahead and finish. So, okay, so you're there, and it's
in a very short period.
Sideways.
Yeah, it did. It actually started to go, and this is where it gets confusing for a lot of leaders, and it certainly did for me. Our results really started upticking very quickly, started putting some great numbers on the board, making record, in performance. And so there's that illusion of success, right? Because on paper, it looked like we were winning. And certainly like I was winning. I came in and suddenly, wow, we're putting some amazing numbers that they've never had on the boards before. And so my wake up call came in the form of a walkout that was conspired behind my back. And I just came downstairs one morning and to a pile of keys and resignations and a spokesperson for the team. So they had been planning this. This is how oblivious and how bad I was, that they had orchestrated this whole thing to happen all at once. And that was a blessing and a curse.
Well, it shouldn't feel like a blessing
in the moment, not in the least. But it was one that we all need that type of thing that kind of knocks us off our heels when we're out over our skis and we're oblivious. And I certainly was one of those leaders who, the scary thing is, in spite of myself, we were getting it done on paper. And so it could go very easily undetected. So speaking to the C-suiters, right, it can go very easily undetected that you can have a bad leader in the field that looks great in the corporate office because their numbers look good. But the reality was, for me, there was a lot of human capital casualty that was being created based on my insecurity, my ego, not knowing how to communicate, not understanding how to lead. It was the quintessential Peter principle, right? Promoted to my level of complete incompetence when it came to the people parts of leadership.
Yep, I get it. I totally get that. So in the book, you open by telling that story, as I said. And then you sort of said, hey, I got to fix this. And you had the boss, the person that hired you, said, I'm going to keep you, even though maybe
I deserve
shouldn't have,
that.
right? But he did, and I think probably now would feel very good about having done that. But you then started your own journey of learning some stuff, right, to help you be more effective as a leader. Sort of figured that out. Eventually ended up where you are now. And in this book, as I said, From Bad to Badass Leader, 12 Leadership Lessons, you do identify 12 lessons.
Yes.
And we don't have time to talk about all 12. Besides, we need everyone to go buy a copy of the book. But I have identified a couple. And then I thought we'd use that as the rest of our conversation. We'd talk about 2 or 3 of them. And then I'll let you pick another one before we finish.
Excellent.
How does that sound?
That sounds
here's
perfect.
where I want to start first. Let's talk about trust, baby. And no,
Right.
I'm not calling Michelle baby. That's
No,
the title of the chapter in the book. Like,
Yes.
don't start yelling at Kevin. I'm just picking the chapter title. And I thought, well, I'll just use the title. So seriously, let's talk about trust as a leader. It's incredibly important. And, much like your story, oftentimes is we can be, unfortunately, a little bit oblivious to what the level of it might be or might not be. So let's talk about what have you learned? What do you share with leaders about trust?
The main thing for me, as far as the one common thread, is when teams don't feel safe and they can't reveal their insecurities, their uncertainty, even their developmental gaps, because they're feel threatened and they don't feel safe, or they're fearful of being judged, or a lot of times organizations will pitch people against one another, not intentionally. Their goal isn't to do that, but they do it unintentionally sometimes, just by maybe it's the way that their incentive programs are designed. I mean, that can create that. And so when teams don't trust their leader or don't feel safe, then they're not going to reveal their areas of opportunity or their gaps. And so trust is vitally important for us as leaders to get in with our people, create a safe environment, know how to coach, be able to, again, share our bumps and bruises and our missteps, to humanize ourselves as leaders, to where then people can feel comfortable in sharing their own performance gaps and uncertainties.
Yeah, you just highlighted something really important. Right. Is that one of the ways that we can build trust with others is to let them see when we've screwed up.
Yes.
Right. Both in the past, to use your earlier example.
Oh, yes.
Hey, listen, I've been down that road and I really screwed it up. That for sure. But also what you did, how you messed up last week, how you messed up this morning. So both sides of that.
Or not knowing the answer to something and being able to go to the team and go, hey guys, I'm really clueless. Let's put our heads together. I really need your help on this. I mean, that inspires collaboration, helps people feel like it's safe to brainstorm. It's not like they're going to be judged. And so that's, that to me is the secret sauce, when leaders can really cultivate those types of teams where you can really tap into the intellectual capital of all. That is not only is it a lot of fun, it's extremely beneficial for business, for people, for performance, and for customer experiences.
People, 95% of the people, 95% of the time, want to bring their best selves to work. And when they don't, one of the big reasons is leaders aren't making it safe for them to do that, right?
Yes.
Trust is an especially interesting thing now, as you've been working with. And so just to give everybody sort of a date stamp here, we're having this conversation. If you're with us live, you obviously know this, that we're having this conversation on the 28th of June, the end of June of 2021. October, November, December, and beyond is when people are going to hear this on the actual podcast. But as you've been talking to leaders in the last few months during the pandemic, certainly in some industries, people working remotely, what have you been sharing about trust specifically there? Or do you have advice for people if they lead a remote or a hybrid team around trust?
Even more important, right? We don't have the advantage of that face-to-face rapport. So, spending more time and really prioritizing relationships and connections, and, those, what I call those informal check-ins, are critically important. And then creating opportunities. A lot of my customers, they went through the boom in 2020. They were in an industry that was they were growing exponentially. And
that's why they could hire you, right? Because the ones that weren't doing that, training got put away, but they kept hiring you because they needed you, right?
Yeah. And you know that when you grow exponentially in a very short period of time, and especially during a crisis where there's so much fear, I mean, to me, you know, whether it's the 12 leadership lessons that we choose to use in our day-to-day interactions when everything is going perfectly, boy, do those 12 lessons come in handy in crisis.
Oh, for
And
sure.
and they stack the same way. I mean, it's you know, you have to understand, you know, lesson one, and then lesson two was stop, drop, take a selfie. So any leader, I mean, especially in a crisis situation coming through a pandemic or even dealing with remote workers, you know, you have to really understand your mirror and how you show up and how you need to show up and how your team is experiencing your leadership.
Yeah.
And that is vitally important. We have to constantly recalibrate ourselves. You know, as our teams change and evolve, we have to move with them and always try and stay out in front of it. But trust is something that becomes ever more important when we're talking about remote workers.
Okay. We could talk our whole time about trust. There's 12 lessons. I've picked a couple others. Here's the next one I've got. Create the struggle. Now, you don't have a question mark at the end of it in the chapter title, but people are going to look at this and say, what? Create the struggle? What are you talking about, Michelle? I got enough struggles already. Don't make me have more?
Struggle is a fantastic thing for teams. And there is a time when to create struggle where I blew up. When I go back to my cataclysmic, you know, leadership failure, I came in creating the struggle with a brand new team, trying to prove myself. And so I created struggle out of the gate. There wasn't any trust. I lacked self-awareness. I didn't have any competencies to speak of when it came to people leadership components. And so creating the struggle is the gift we get to have as leaders when we handle lessons 1 through 6. So it's when you get, I call it stretch them like Gumby. When we get to the point where your teams really trust you, where you've been an epic coach, where you really are very self-aware, you have prioritized people over performance, right? You've built that badass team around you. Now you get the privilege of really stretching them outside their comfort zones and their job descriptions to really help them, you know, step into their true and greatest potential as team members.
Perfect. And in the let's see, in the mode of the badass leader brand, my favorite chapter title is this one, because I've said this, and my dad used to say this to me. Oh, actually, my dad said something slightly differently. My dad used to say, "Put on your big boy pants and go to work." You're saying, "Suck it up,
Buttercup."
So, all right, now what? Okay, what are you talking about here? Because there's a big lesson for us here.
Yeah. So this one is really focused on the leader. And that is where, you know, the struggle is going to happen. I mean, in the case of 2020, right? It happened. And so what we have to do as leaders is all eyes are upon us, right? Everybody is looking to see how we're reacting and we're responding. And so this is where doesn't matter how much of a, you know, show it is, an S show it is, we have to suck it up, and we cannot, I call it verbally vomit or stress our people up. You can't communicate downward that through the organization. You have to find peers that you can lean on. You have to communicate up the channel. You have to find resources that are going to help support you navigate yourself first and then your team. Because if we can't self-navigate, we're never going to get our people there to give them the support that they need in order to get through whatever type of crisis we're dealing with.
100%. And again, if you're here with us live at the end of June, we all have been living one of these, right?
Yes.
This whole, everything related to all this, and regardless of how you feel about, you know, how it's been handled by our government or any of that, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The thing is, you got all sorts of folks on your team with all sorts of different situations in their households and different situations and different worries and frustrations. Our job is hard, and we've got to suck it up, and we can't vent to the team, right?
No.
We just can't do it.
And the struggle, you know, the struggle was
here, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, the struggle was in the case of 2020, the struggle was created for us. And so, you know, Suck It Up Buttercup also has to do with how can we tap into different possibilities? How do we innovate? You know, I completely shifted my business platform to virtual. And so I got into the immediately, instead of kind of chicken littling the situation about what can I do? And so how do we get our teams to rally around what's possible? And how do we brainstorm ways to, you know, crush the goal, you know, find the solution, take it to the next level. And that's the leader's responsibility.
And you make an excellent point here, and that is that we have to recognize what's really going on. We can enlist our team to help us with it, but we shouldn't be Pollyanna. Like I say, well, everything's fine. We don't have to. We don't linger there, but we have to acknowledge that, or people are just thinking you're on a different planet, right? And like, what is it even about? So we've got to find the balance of those two things. Most definitely. We've talked about 3 of the lessons. We've talked about trust and the struggle and our need to take care of ourselves and get the help we need so we can help our team. Suck it up, Buttercup.
Yes.
Give me one more. Give me either on here. I've call it your favorite, but what's the one you want to talk about that we haven't talked about so far?
I would say the don't be a kiss ass. So that would be lesson 9, because a lot of people go, what does that mean? in business.
Yes. My grandma has just left again. Just my dearly departed grandmother, if she made it this far because she loved me, now she's like, I guess I'm done here. Right? But so what do you mean when you say, Michelle, don't be a kiss ass?
Yeah, what it means is that as leaders, we have to be responsible for how we communicate. And so, don't be a yes person. Figure out how to communicate your message respectfully, and that it's a skill set that we really, it's a developmental opportunity for us as leaders. How do I communicate maybe bad news, or how do I come up with a different idea in a way that helps me have greater influence and greater impact? And if we're just constantly yesing everything and then going behind the backs of leaders or others or even our peers and disagreeing after the meeting, it really is important that we figure out how to use our voice and leverage it in a way that's good for business teams and organizations. And we can't do that if we're being a kiss ass, if we're constantly yesing to everything and not being authentic, respectfully authentic. So learning how to communicate throughout the channel is critically important.
I agree 100%. And I think that there's a variety of problems with that. You identified many of them in terms of the mistakes that we make. But the other one is that sometimes, if we are trying to be a kiss ass with our team members, not just up and out and with customers, then we run the risk of them not really knowing what they need to know, right? Yeah. Like if we're trying to beat around the bush, if we try to spin something nicer, hoping they'll figure it out, like that never goes well, right?
No. And you go back to lesson 3, right? Where let's talk about trust, baby, because that's what happens. You erode trust when you're inauthentic. And now when I say, don't be a kiss ass, I'm not going to come in and badmouth, but I am going to be very honest about the current reality and then rally the troops to go, okay, now we're, whatever it might be. It might be a struggle. It might be a goal that we get to figure out. Maybe it's a goal that's almost reachable, but it may seem like it isn't, so rallying and just, I look at it as, it's, if you have somebody in an ICU unit and you have them on life support, you're constantly measuring and monitoring their vital signs. And so as leaders, it's the same thing. We need to constantly measure the vital signs of our teams on how healthy they are and what do they need from us, because that's my primary responsibility. They're my first customer, and I need to make sure I'm taking care of them, because then they'll be able to deliver that brand promise or brand experience or customer experience that we are so proud of.
Absolutely. So at this particular time right now, like what are you finding? I mean, sort of let us into your world and let us into the mind of the leaders that you work with. What are you helping leaders with? What are they concerned about? And by the way, before you answer that question, Michelle, if you're here with us live and you haven't commented yet, we're ready. Give us give Michelle your baddest badass question, and for you. So if you've got a question, please share it. But Michelle, what are you hearing? What are you helping leaders with these days?
Yeah. So the most common conversation I have with organizations today are really about do we have our workers return full time? do we approach leadership from a hybrid standpoint? And what is the impact on team performance? How do we make the dream work in those remote or hybrid settings? And so it's been a lot of fun for me to brainstorm with them, because I'm really excited about the evolution of business as a result. Again, it's the beauty after struggle. What did we learn? What worked? What didn't work? What can we do forward? Let's not go back to the old normal. Let's create a new one. And more importantly, when we talk about, say, these 12 leadership lessons and trust, organizations were forced to let go of the reins a bit and surrender and trust and allow workers to be remote in order to keep their businesses alive. And so now my invitation for a lot of my organizations that I'm working with are, how are you going to, evolve as a business? So many of them are choosing to shrink their brick and mortars, to stay full-time remote. And then what they're tapping into me about is okay, so now how do we bring our teams together in retreats that are actively, quarterly offsite retreats, to where we have the opportunity to work hard, brainstorm, play together, and bond as a team. And so they're repurposing. My customers are repurposing and reinvesting their money in opportunities to bring teams together, and also trying to honor remote work. And the most exciting thing for them has been that their pool of talent has just gotten really big that they can choose from. And so that's been the most frequent conversations I've been having of leaders. How do we transition and maintain our hybrid approach, but still bring teams together so that they can learn and grow and stay connected?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm currently now very close to Scottsville, Michigan, a very small little town. If your business is in Scottsville, Michigan, and you're in everyone's in person, then you've got here's your job pool, right? Scottsville,
Yes.
Ludington,
Yeah.
Fountain, right? But now can be Scottsbluff, Nebraska, and
Yes.
Scottsburg, Indiana, and Scottsdale, Arizona, all right.
Yes. And it's so great because as leaders, we go into that space of where we're really not only expanding the pool of talent that we get to choose from, but we're demonstrating trust, that we trust our people. And what's happening with several of my customers is they're seeing record numbers, and it isn't the pandemic that's driving the results. I mean, these are industries that were negatively impacted by the pandemic. Their business really dropped significantly, and many of them had their stock drop significantly, but performance was up exponentially. The best year that they've ever had with respect to what their teams are producing, with fewer headcounts and greater outcomes. And so now, if that doesn't make you stop, drop, and roll and take a look at your business, I think it really should. And that's a missed opportunity if organizations aren't stepping back and going, how do we maintain this going forward? How do we build on that? And so much has been because people are willing to, and back in March of last year, I'd done a little YouTube blurb for, 3 minutes, talking about anticipation and about anticipating that desire to stay remote, and that people will go the extra mile in order to have the freedom to go, hey, maybe I'm going to sell my house where I live, and I'm going to go move to Colorado, and I want to, and I'll work even harder, and I'll be flexible. Maybe I'll work a different shift in order to have the opportunity to have that freedom to choose.
I think you're so right. And if people are watching us right now, I'm telling people, I did a keynote this morning. I'm doing another one this afternoon. And in both of them, I make this statement: we are living in a moment that matters. Yes. And when you watch or listen to this in October, that's still going to be true. And if you're listening to us 5 years from now, you're going to say, that was right. Kevin might not be very smart about a lot of things, but that is completely true. 100%. Michelle, I'm going to shift gears on you.
Okay.
I want you to tell me what you do for fun.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's an easy one. We love the outdoors. So it's either we're on dirt bikes or on street bikes or out camping under the stars in the desert where there's no light pollution, and we can just sit underneath the Milky Way and take it in by the fire pit and hang out with friends and family. And we love to cook. So anything that's adventurous. Yeah, that's our thing.
I don't think people are going to be too surprised by
No.
that. They see the brand that is behind your head. We are talking with Michelle Reines, the author of From Bad to Badass Leader, Live to Lead. And while she would like you to order a copy of this book to read it, she's going to tell you how to do that in a minute. I want you to tell me, Michelle, what you're doing. What are you reading these days? It's not this. You already read this a long time ago. And you wrote it. So I've read it since you have, right? So what are you reading these days?
I have it right here on my desk, actually. Marketing Made Simple by Don Miller. So I think it's fantastic. And I've been doing a lot of streamlining on both of my brands, actually, for MDR Coaching and Consulting, Inc., which is my traditional leadership brand, and then the Badass Leader brand. So really defining our brand. So that's if you haven't picked it up, the Story brand is a great tool.
Perfect. So Michelle, where can people learn more about your work? Where do you want to point people if they want to learn more about your work or about the book? Where would you point people?
I would say visit us at badassleader.com. There you have a page to the book. There's also our Badass Leader Academy. If you're interested, we have, I think 475 courses that are all on demand. Academy there. We do boot camps. We do adventure retreats paired with boot camps and keynotes. So there's all sorts of information out there for organizations or just individuals that are saying, hey, I want to, take the bull by the reins and figure out, or bull by the horns, if you will, and figure out how to be more effective as a leader. If I could. Yeah. So yes. So whether it be individuals or organizations, and we've also done hybrid. So several of our organizations like aspects of the Badass Leader brand, but they also like MDR. So they said, mush it together. And we're like, great. So we're flexible, whatever floats your boat, we can definitely deliver.
Badassleader.com. Now I have a question before we finish. I have a question for all of you who are watching or listening. It's my favorite 2-word question. If you've watched or listened before, you know what's coming. But here it is. Now what? What are you going to do with what you just heard from Michelle? What are you going to take from the conversation we just had? Maybe you have a realization, or maybe you were just reminded, or maybe you now realize you need to think more about how others are viewing you. Maybe you realize that you need to focus more on trust. Maybe, just maybe, there's something else that we've talked about that you realize you need to spend more time on. Whatever that is for you. I don't want to presume what the answer is. But I do want to encourage you to think of your answer and then go take action. So, Michelle, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
It was absolutely my pleasure. So before we go, everybody, just to remind you that this episode was brought to you today by the Remarkable Masterclasses. Each month, we release a new skill in advanced form of a masterclass format to help you become the leader and human you were born to be. You can learn more about a specific skill or get discounts each month by going to remarkablemasterclass.com. I hope you will do that. And I hope that you will join us next week. If you're on the podcast, we'll be here next week. If you're live, we won't be here next week because it'll be the 5th of July. And we're not going to do it because you wouldn't be here anyway. But listen, every week on the podcast, there's a new episode. And if it's a new week, there's a new episode for you to enjoy. I hope you'll do that. Michelle, thanks again for being here. We will see everybody soon. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.